Meet Patrick, a fun-loving 12-year-old boy who absolutely hates homework. Instead of studying, he spends his time playing Nintendo, lost in his own world of games and adventure. His schoolbooks lie untouched around him, collecting dust. But while Patrick enjoys his games, his mother and teacher watch over him, worried, disappointed. Their voices echo in his mind, reminding him of unfinished assignments, warning him of the consequences. Yet, Patrick doesn't seem to care, at least, not yet. One ordinary evening, Patrick stumbled upon something extraordinary. Suspenseful pause, sound of a cat's playful meow. A tiny elf, with a long white beard, a pointy hat, and clothes from another time, the little creature trembled in Patrick's hands, its tiny arms raised in fear. But Patrick wasn't the only one who had found him. His fluffy orange cat had other plans. What was this strange little being? And why was it here? Patrick had no idea, but he was about to find out. There he stood, a tiny elf with a long white beard, a tall pointed hat, and a face full of frustration. With his arms crossed tightly, he glared up at Patrick, clearly unimpressed. But Patrick didn't care. This was his moment. A real chance to make a wish, to change everything. The air felt electric. Something powerful was about to happen. The camera zooms in on Patrick's eager face, then back to the elf as the glow intensifies. But what would Patrick wish for? And would the elf even grant it? For a magical creature, this little elf didn't seem very, well, magical. Sitting atop a stack of books, he fumbled with an old-fashioned quill, trying hopelessly to write in Patrick's notebook. Patrick scratches his head, his face filled with confusion. Patrick watched, completely baffled. Wasn't magic supposed to make this easier? Instead, the table was a mess. Ink splattered, pages crumpled, and the elf. He was growing more frustrated by the second. The elf sighs loudly, tossing the quill aside in defeat, while Patrick looks on, half amused, half concerned. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be as easy as Patrick had hoped. If there was one thing this tiny elf didn't expect, it was homework. He squinted at the words, waved his little arms in protest, and muttered under his breath. Reading? Seriously? The scene shifts to Patrick, calmly pointing at a dictionary, patiently helping him sound out words. But Patrick wasn't giving up. He leaned in, guiding the elf, breaking down each word slowly. A slow pan of the cozy room, educational posters on the wall, a steaming cup of tea, stacks of books on a wooden cupboard. The room was warm, inviting, filled with books and lessons waiting to be learned. But the only thing filling the elf's mind was frustration. The elf groans dramatically, flopping onto the book, while Patrick chuckles, shaking his head. Maybe magic wasn't the answer to everything after all. Magic might have worked in fairy tales, but math was a whole different kind of problem. The tiny elf stood on the study table, eyes wide, completely lost. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, what did all these symbols even mean? The scene shifts to Patrick, calmly pointing at the notebook, trying to explain with patience. Luckily, Patrick had spent enough time in school to know one thing: if the elf wanted to help, he'd have to learn. The camera pans to the chalkboard, showing numbers written in Hindi and English, along with the small clay pot holding pens and pencils. The room was set for learning, the answers were right there, but the elf? He was ready to disappear. The elf groans, dramatically flopping onto the notebook, while Patrick chuckles and pats his tiny back. multiplication was tough, even for a magical creature. The nights grew longer, the books grew heavier, and Patrick? He had never worked this hard in his life. The camera zooms in on Patrick's tired eyes as he leans over his desk, rubbing them before picking up his pencil again. His once playful, carefree days were replaced by endless pages of words and numbers. The tiny elf, standing on a book, waves his tiny hands, pointing at different pages with urgency. And the elf? He wasn't about to let him stop now. A slow pan of the dimly lit room, study lamp casting a warm glow, stacks of books, an empty cup of tea, the clock ticking towards midnight. The hours slipped away, the clock struck midnight, but Patrick had no choice. He had to keep going. A dramatic pause as Patrick sighs, stretches, and continues writing, determination in his tired eyes. Little did he know, this wasn't just about homework anymore. Morning arrived, but Patrick, he was still lost in sleep. The camera zooms in on Patrick's face, resting on an open book, his tired body finally at rest. He had worked harder than ever before, pushing through sleepless nights, determined to learn. The scene shifts to the tiny elf, sneaking toward the back door, carrying a small brown satchel. And now, the elf's work was done. A slow pan reveals the golden sunlight spilling into the courtyard, lighting up the wooden fence and green plants. Quietly, without a word, he slipped away, his mission complete, his presence never to be known. The elf pauses at the door for a moment, glancing back at Patrick with a knowing look. But if Patrick had learned anything, he didn't need magic anymore. A new day had begun, and so had a new Patrick. The camera zooms in on Patrick, confidently walking into school, smiling as he greets his classmates. Gone was the tired, distracted boy who avoided his homework. In his place stood someone different, someone ready to learn. The scene shifts to the teacher in her sari, smiling proudly as she watches Patrick approach. His teacher saw the change in him, the focus in his eyes, the confidence in his steps. This was a student who had worked hard, who had learned more than just school lessons. A slow pan of the schoolyard, the simple Indian-style school, the chalkboard with schedules, and the bright blue sky filled with birds soaring high. For the first time, Patrick wasn't just going to school, he was embracing it. The camera lingers on Patrick as he walks into his classroom, ready for the day ahead. And little did he know, this was only the beginning. It was in this very moment that Patrick finally understood. The camera zooms in on Patrick's bright smile as he flips a page in his notebook, fully engaged in his studies. He had done it. Every problem solved, every lesson learned by himself. A gentle shimmer appears above Patrick's head as the ghostly image of the tiny elf hovers playfully. And the elf? He had always known the truth. With a sly wink, he whispered a silent farewell. The elf winks, arms crossed, before fading away into a swirl of golden sparkles. Because magic was never the answer. Patrick had always been capable of learning, he just needed to believe in himself. The camera pulls back, revealing the study room, the neatly arranged books, the glowing motivational poster, the calendar marking a new beginning. And from this day on, Patrick wasn't just a student. He was someone who loved to learn.